Hi, I'm Dan Frament, former owner of Muddaddy Flats Quesadillery, not your average quesadilla. And I'm on Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City.
Hello, and welcome back to another chapter of Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City, where we explore the history of Troy, New York, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, John Salka. This week, we spend some time with longtime small business owner and restaurateur Dan Frament. For 11 years, Dan owned and operated Muddaddy Flats in downtown Troy. Earlier this year, Dan decided to shutter Muddaddy, a blow to quesadilla lovers across Troy. I reached out to Dan, and he graciously agreed to talk about his journey as a business owner, his early life growing up in Troy, and his long and varied career in the human services and food service industry before deciding to strike out on his own. We recorded this interview in late February in the now shuttered Muddaddy Flats storefront on 3rd Street, so you might notice the noise of the restaurant and sounds of the street, including people, cars, and buses passing by. Dan seemed to genuinely enjoy unearthing some old memories of his childhood, literally laughing out loud as we wandered down memory lane. This chapter is a story about Dan's tenacity and desire to learn and grow across multiple careers and industries. For those who know Dan, he always wears his heart on his sleeve and is someone who loves his family, his work, and his community. I really enjoyed recording this interview, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with all of you. As always, please visit troystorypod.com for information on upcoming chapters. Also, don't forget to sign up for weekly email updates where you'll get notified as soon as new episodes are available. Finally, would you mind doing us a favor? One of the most effective ways to help us grow our audience is through word of mouth. If you could share this episode with your friends, family, or neighbors, that would be incredibly appreciated. Lastly, if you have an idea, suggestion, or feedback on the show, drop us a line at mail@troystorypod.com. Now, without further ado, let's jump into part 1 of our talk with Dan Frament, former owner of Muddaddy Flats. Hello and welcome back to the latest chapter in Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City. I am joined by Dan Frament, former owner-operator of
Muddaddy Flats.
Muddaddy Flats here in downtown Troy. Dan, thank you so much for being the third ever guest on Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City.
Wow, thanks, John. It is an honor to be here. This is all about Troy. And my life is all about Troy. So I'm very happy and excited and honored to be here.
You know, when I think of you, I just always think of your resounding positivity and upbeat approach, I think, to pretty much everything. You've always been a Troy booster as long as I've lived here for almost going on a decade now. You're just always the person I think of when I think of people who are just Troy boosters through and through.
It's those little voices in the back of your head, and one of mine is Ray Kroc, who said that none of us are as good as all of us, and there are truly amazing people here in Troy, and I love this community. So you get to know the people, you get to know the community, and how can you not be positive? How can you not want to share this with the world? There's enough yuck in the world. Let's find the things to enjoy. Share the things to enjoy. If you want bad news, turn on the news. Open the newspaper. But, look around you, and there are good things happening. So that's how I try to live. I see that. I see dreams in the making. I see people fighting their fears to move ahead with their life and share their dreams with the world. So, I'd rather help them than be an internet troll thumbing my nose and bringing things down. And did you fact check this? No, let's be a good neighbor. Be a neighbor and take care of each other. When I first started, social media savvy, I was not. I couldn't even create the page. My son was 14. He made my Facebook page because I didn't know how to do it. It would take me 2 years to be able to reasonably post a picture because I just kept messing it up. But I got to visit other places and I would share how much I enjoyed them. And people would question me because, like, why are you promoting your competition? Like, that's not my competition. That's my neighbor. And these are great people. This place is really cool. And the whole point of social media is, like, you want to share the good things in your life and connect and engage. And it's like, hey, you got to see this. And it actually started catching on. People realize that you don't have to guard and protect your business, but there's a lot here. And people want to come to a place where there's a lot. And it was getting better. So we just grew with it. It's so much fun. At one point, walking down the street with the older of my two boys, and he was like 17 at the time. And I had gotten to know a number. So we're walking around and people are waving and saying hi. And he's just looking at me. And he goes, how do you know so many people? Or how do so many people know you? Don't they know what a jerk you are? Not the word you use, but like, well, yes and no. Yes, but they don't work for me, so that doesn't matter.
Right.
But you get to know people. That sense of community is cool. When you can walk down the street and say hi to a half a dozen neighbors at every block, that's the best part of life. There's not enough money in the world to make up for that. You can't buy that. You can't. And that's Troy.
This is not the original location. And when I say this is not the original location, we're recording, for people who are listening, we're recording in the current Muddaddy Flats location in downtown on 3rd.
Correct. This is 49 3rd Street.
So where was the original location?
The original was 409 Fulton Street. Aquilonia comic books across the street. Shalimar next door. When I opened Black and White Taxi was my other neighbor. The street was kind of dark. It was a neat little space. Found it by accident, and it was little. And I just said, okay, we're doing this. I had been waiting a long time. I had plans written for different restaurant concepts, different ideas. I had wanted to have my own, but I was taking my time, one, so my time to be able to raise my kids, and two, develop the skill and experience to be able to actually do this without falling flat on my face. So that's what I did. And then I saw a Craigslist ad. Guy was selling some equipment. So I came down and I looked at the equipment, and I looked at the space, and I understand what he was doing. That was never going to happen there. And I immediately knew what I could do with what he had. So I bought the equipment, put me in contact with the landlord about renting the space, and then I just kind of went to it, started the process. And it was a little space. It was a weird little space. It was kind of wonky, not well cared for, but okay. Didn't have much of a budget, basically had no budget, because from 2008 to 2012, all my investments had just, I guess they weren't well placed, because they all pretty much went away. Everything that I had spent, gone. Yep, that whole bubble burst. I was on the wrong side of the bubble. But I took what I had and just went to it. It was bumpy. It was real bumpy. But yeah, we got going, and people said they thought it was a fun idea. And I heard a lot of, well, this is really cool, but I don't think it'll last 6 months, which was pretty much a curse on that block, because anything that had been in that building for years, nothing survived 6 months. The closest was Badass Burrito that died in just under 6 months. And it's like, oof. But that's okay. We cleaned up in front of the street. We had light. We reached out. I would send the boys out with menus to stick on cars. We would run to the farmer's market and do samples and hand out menus and try to get people to come back. And we worked at it. And we started to grow. And then we had some more help from RPI when they said, hey, you want to do a Taste of Troy at RPI? And I said, sure. I'm trying to remember her name.
Well, do you know what year was that?
That was 2014, 13, 14.
About 10 years ago.
Yeah. I made a list of what I needed to make 400 quesadillas. Now, mind you, at that point, my average sales were like 12 to 15 quesadillas a day. Okay, what am I going to do to make 400? So I started doing all the math, and I gave her Jackie Baldwin. There we go, up at RPI. And she put it all in. She said, okay, we're going to get the stuff, and then you're going to help us get it all prepped up and ready. And then we're going to do a Taste of Troy in the main dining hall.
So this was just all different restaurants from Troy serving their food on campus?
One at a time.
Oh, so you were like you were like a featured restaurant for a day.
Yes. So
that's cool.
That was really cool, and that was extremely overwhelming.
Oh, I can imagine.
Because, mind you, I would make Muddaddy sauce.
What was that?
That is our signature Portuguese churrasco or steak sauce. But I would make it a quart at a time. Just a blender batch and you know, make it in the blender, put it on the pot, on the stove, and cook it down. But a quart at a time. Now I needed to figure out how to make 5 gallons. Like, wow, talk about trial by fire. So we and then went up and we just had sheet pan after sheet pan, just like these speed racks, these rolling racks full of quesadillas set and racked and ready to throw on the grill. And then it was time to just start cooking, cutting, and serving. It was pretty amazing.
Got a question? Have a suggestion? We want to hear from you. Drop us a line at mail@troystorypod.com. You can also find us on social media, including YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Facebook, and even the digital wasteland known as X, formerly Twitter. And now, back to the show.
During that same time, another company had moved to Troy, Apprenda. Apprenda was an internet. I'm still not sure exactly what they did, but it was always really cool just to go there.
I think it was software as a service.
Yeah.
Right.
That sounds about right. Their lead group came and were canvassing the city, and they were looking for places to order lunch for people working. So initially it was for, can you make lunch for 12? And okay, I can make lunch for 12 and bring it down. We'll make this work. My wife said, how are you going to do this? I said, I don't know. We'll figure it out. But then lunch for 12 became lunch for 25. And she's like, well, I was like, well, okay, we're figuring this out. We're getting better at it. And then it went to once a month we would do lunch for 75. And like, okay, how do you do this? And we learned how to make quesadilla platters and how to do lunch orders for different offices. Like, it wasn't always pretty, and it was always very stressful. Trying to go as fast as you can, trying to get all this stuff made, get it hot, keep it warm, and then transport it. But that just kept bringing more people in. Toby at First Playable had a policy. They don't have a coffee pot at First Playable. If you want coffee, you go out in the community. If you want to get stuff, you go and visit your community. So we would get groups from First Playable. And in the beginning, when it was just me, and my wife would come and go during the day, there were times when I'd get like 7, 8 people from First Playable walk in the door. I'm like, cool, shoot. Because now I got to take their order, get all their orders, and then glove up, get them made, get them out. But while I'm making lunch for them, other people are strolling in. So I just bounced around like a pinball, going as fast as I could. Gloves on, gloves off, gloves on, because God help you don't wear gloves when handling money, then go back to handling food. That's all no. So, but they were great because they would come and that helped. And they would come after work, and all these little steps kept adding up, and it got to the point where I didn't have enough room or enough refrigeration to store enough to go for more than a day to a day and a half. So every morning I would have to get up, run to Colony to the restaurant depot, and then come back because I wasn't able to order enough through third-party deliveries or third-party vendors for a delivery. So like, well, you can order and then we'll call, so I can order and then go pick up. but it was cheaper to go to the depot. So we just kind of mixed and matched, but I ran, and it was like, I can't keep going like this. So we started looking for another location. Mind you, that 6 months had long since come and gone. So when Selena's Cafe closed, I waited a week. I still hadn't heard anything. So I reached out and finally found somebody, and she wasn't sure what was happening, but it was closed. So we started talking, and she had a second location in East Greenbush that she was focusing on. So we started making a deal, and okay, we're going to move. And people asked, Dan, did you do a cost analysis? Did you do a like, no. And they're like, why? Like, you don't understand. This is impossible. There's no way I can afford to do this. It's like all my expenses are about to double right out of the chute. I can't, there's no way, there's no backup money for this. So why are you going to do it? Well, because I got to do something. We dug in. We ran Fulton Street during the day and then came here and worked at night and got the place ready and managed to get everything moved in and set. And we opened here. It was a Tuesday, August 26, 2014. My anniversary, my second year anniversary would be September 12th, just a couple weeks later. So just like a couple weeks short of my second anniversary, we opened up here on a Tuesday. And sales immediately hit. Boom, people were here. And then that Friday was Troy Night Out. 2014, Troy Night Out was still really hot. So they came. Now, at Fulton Street, having a line to the door was no big deal because it was only like 6 feet from the counter to the door. So a line to the door, it was cool, but it wasn't a big deal. Here, a line to the door is 37 feet. And when you got a line to the door and it stays that way, we were nowhere prepared to go like that. It was like...
it's a blessing and a curse.
It is definitely a blessing and a curse. And it's like we had prepped and more than we had ever done before. And then we started running out. I got 12 orders hanging on the slip rack. I got a line at the counter, and I'm out of chicken. Okay, break out everything else we got. We got beef, we got pork. It's like anything I can throw. It's like, these are your options. We can make something. I'm scrambling, trying to get, it's like, what can I cook fast enough to get in there and getting out gift certificates. And
was it just you at the time, or was it you and your wife running? Were your kids, I can't remember, at that time your kids weren't old enough to...
Yeah, they were. They were there. They helped on Fulton Street. They were here. So both of my sons, we had 2 other employees. And then friends of my son would help on and off. We would hire them for days here and there. So I think we had probably 6 people here. And it was, it was something. It's like, okay, we're learning how to do this. Later, following year, I would start doing Rockin' on the River and learning to do offsites. So Riverfest, Pig Out, Rockin' on the River, learning how to set up and do offsite events. It just kept growing. Starting out offsite events, it was funny because it had a Honda Element. Now, I got a grill, a couple tables, tent, all the stuff that goes in it, all the coolers. There's a lot of moving pieces there. So I had an RPI student who would graduate, stay with us for a few years, and Joey and I were the ones that built off-site. And what we would do is we would load about half of the stuff into the car so it was packed. And we'd go down the riverfront park and unload it. And he'd start setting up the tent and getting things together. Well, I came back and put the rest of it in and then drove down and unloaded it. And then after the event, we'd try to break it all down, pull it together, and put half in it. And I'd bring it back, unload it, go back, get Joey and the rest of the stuff. And then that's how our first year, that's how we did events. Different events, people are like, hey, we saw you here. Can you come here? I was like, okay. The following year, we got smarter. Well, how about if we rent a U-Haul? And so we can do this in 1 trip instead of 2. And got better at that. And our tent setup got better and we grew. And then 2017, I found this truck. It was a Pepsi truck. That was actually a godsend when we got that up and running. It was ugly, but I love that truck. And then we could leave stuff in it. You didn't have to take the the canopy and the grill and the table and the trash cans and all those hard goods. You didn't have to stash them in the restaurant, put them in the truck, take them out of the truck, put them back in the restaurant. It's like, put them in the truck. So it got down, so it only took like 45 minutes to set up for an event. But, oh God, I love that truck. But that's how we started doing events. And we started doing more and more. We started going to breweries and different concert series. And we had some great times.
Like what you hear? Well, then it might be time to give us a flattering review. Reviews are the best way to make the mysterious and magical podcast algorithm suggest our modest little show to other listeners. And if you're feeling extra generous, please share this episode with a friend, family member, or that special person in your life. They'll thank you for it, and we will be forever in your debt. Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City, streaming everywhere you get your podcasts. Visit TroyStoryPod.com to learn more. All right, back to the show. Where does the name Muddaddy Flats come from? Because it's a very interesting name, and it's a sort of an interesting spelling too. Muddaddy, Muddaddy.
It goes back decades. During my divorce, I have a daughter, and when her mother and I were getting divorced, I was working at the Doyle Middle School. My job was to help integrate a young man with Down syndrome and a lot of behavior issues into the school population. But during the summer, of course, school's out. I needed to work. I had a friend who was a Mason. I actually met Jordy at church, and it's like a friend said, "Hey, Jordy needs help." He's like, he could use somebody with a strong back. And one of the other things that was happening at that time was the young kid that I was working with, he needed a way to release energy, needed focus, something. So we started weightlifting. And that was working. And someone from Special Olympics found out. So Special Olympics reached out to me and they said, "Hey, Dan, we want to get a powerlifting team started. You think you could do that for us?" It's like, got nothing to lose. Okay. So a friend at work or at church says, Jordy needs somebody. He's like, "You're a weightlifter, So I got a job with a brick mason as a laborer. So I was the grunt guy. Some of the jobs were messier than others. And I'd come home and I'd be a mess. And my daughter would say, "You the mud daddy, daddy." And it's just one of those things that stuck around. Like, "You the mud daddy, daddy." And so when we were starting the restaurant, it's like, okay, it needs to have a name. It needs to have something that flows. It's like, I'm certainly not going to do Dan's Quesadillas. Like, it's so boring. Like, this Mud Daddy handle has been kicking around for years. So it's like, well, how about we'll just make it Mud Daddy? It's like, it's missing something. Mud Daddy Quesadillas? No. Like, flats. They're flat. Everything's based on. So Mud Daddy Flats. It has a nice ring. And then I sent a text to my daughter. Mind you, she's 35 now. She was 3 when she first called me Mud Daddy. But she sent me back a text, and all it said was "Nacho Average Quesadilla." That's perfect. There's my tagline. There's my elevator speech. Sum up your business in 2 sentences or less. It's like, I can top that. I'll do it in 3 words. Like, sold. That was fantastic. Added that in, and then we had the name, and the name worked. It was very brandable. Like, okay, we need a mascot, a symbol, something. And we had this fiberglass alligator statue wearing a toque and a chef's apron and a chef's coat and apron. And our younger son, Ian, had found it in the trash and brought it home. It's like, it was cool, but it had just sit around. I don't know why we kept it, but we just kept it. We thought it was really cool. Here's this alligator in a chef's suit. My wife says, "Well, why don't you just take that damn gator?" Oh, what a fun idea. It's like, okay, how do we make this into a logo? Her brother started doing drawings, and he came up with some great cartoon drawings, and we settled on one. It's like, okay, this is our guy. That's we got our name and our mascot, and like, okay, let's start seeing how we can put this together. It was just all the pieces just kept coming, and we've just grown with it since.
Can you talk a little bit about your early life in Troy? You grew up in North Central neighborhood, correct?
I grew up in North Central, 5th Ave, right by the corner of 5th and 101st. My grandmother owned a house around the corner on River Street. A standout memory from when I was little was I would sit out on the corner of River and 101st, whereas now, I don't even know if it was Kennedy's Chicken and Pizza for a long time recently, and then it changed a couple years back. But it was long before that, it was an empty lot, and I watched them build a Dandy Donuts on that spot. So we're talking, we're back in the 60s watching them erect the Dandy Donuts on that spot. And then when the bicycle races used to come down River Street, my grandfather was a truck driver, drove a fuel truck. We would go to Catholic school. So we went to St. Patrick's. I have an older brother and a younger sister. So Eddie would do more years at St. Patrick's than I did. I did kindergarten, first and second grade. And then afterwards, we moved further south to 6th at the bottom, right by the corner of Middleburg. We were right across the street from School 1. So then I would go to School 1 when it was just a regular elementary school. It's like I'm just thinking about collecting bottles and going to the corner stores down the street, or, turning in bottles for money to go over to Bellinopoly. I was in a single-parent home. It was my mom and the three of us. So divorcees were looked at much differently then than they are now. So that was always not the best. But then she got married. I was 10 years old, and we moved to Grizzle Heights. So I would go to Grizzle Heights for a year, and then we moved out to East Greenbush, which was what a culture shock. We would move out to East Greenbush right off of exit 10 of I-90. And at that point, that's where I-90 ended. I mean, they were working on the road, but traffic ended at exit 10. So we could, when they weren't doing work, we could ride our bikes up down the empty stretch because no traffic was coming. It was blocked off. But
when you say culture shock, you mean just coming from like a city to moving to the suburbs and sort of being a lot more spread out from other people?
Absolutely. It was living in Grizzle Heights. You're packed. There's people everywhere. Now I'm in East Greenbush in a 2-family home on a suburban street, and the next closest house is 200 yards away, and there's no kids there. But there's this big field, and you can go exploring in the woods. It was a lot different. There's definitely a lot more space. I had one friend that I made early on, and we would be best friends all through high school. So we would ride our bikes and go exploring and go fishing, and he had snowmobiles to ride in the winter because they were in a much different environment.
Just to jump back really quickly, so your mother was not originally from Troy, correct? Like when you think about your family history, we talked about this before we started, but can you go through sort of where your family's roots are from, at least from your mother's side? I think you have
her mother, my grandmother, was born in Puerto Rico and grew up in New York City. She married a French-Canadian construction worker, and he was a budding construction company, so he had jobs up and down the coast. And they lived in Georgia when my mom, who was the oldest of 3, was born. And how she came to be settled here, I'm not sure, other than it was after her mother's divorce. She moved to Troy. And the people that owned the house had a son. My mom and their older son got married. And then there was a couple of turbulent years, and then he disappeared. And in the meantime, I was the second of 3. My brother's the oldest. He was born in Jersey, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I was born in Troy. I have a sister that was born just outside of Detroit. And we're all like 18 months apart. So, life was like, it was bouncing around. And then we came back here and we stayed. It was her mother and his mother combined that helped my mom get to get going or to get on her feet.
So you were born, and then at some point your family moved to Detroit, and that was where your sister was
my
born?
younger sister was born.
And then eventually you came back here.
And then we came back here.
Wow.
So, silver spoon life? Not even close. Like, look, we were, it's working class people, working class life. My mom was young, so while I grew up, she had to finish school, get her GED, and, started, trying to get a college degree and go to school and work and raise rambunctious children, because my brother and I were a handful. Always a handful, and good heavens.
Thanks so much for tuning into this interview with Dan Frament, former owner of Muddaddy Flats. I just want to give a trigger warning for this upcoming segment. There is a detailed description of an injury that Dan received to his hand. So if you're squeamish, you might want to skip over some of the more graphic details. So you grew up in North Greenbush in your later childhood years, high school, and then you decided to join the service?
Yeah, I needed to do something. I was getting in trouble a lot in school. I was just spirited, kind of angry. Yeah, just stuck in a wrong mindset, I suppose. There were college opportunities. I had really good grades, but I also spent a lot of time in school suspension because my grades were good and I could do the work. That was the easy part, but it's like behaving in class wasn't my strong suit. So he's like, then I figured, okay, I need to do something else and whatever. And my first thought was, I'm going to join the Army. I'm going to be a mechanic and party in the motor pool. That was my initial goal. I'm like, I'm just going to escape. But then Uncle Sam changed my orders, and they made me a truck driver instead. So I just started driving things. This is great. And it was. But I got bored and managed to switch to reserve component. It's like, well, what if I change my contract? What if I stay in longer, but instead of a 4-year hitch, I do a 6-year hitch and do the rest of it in a reserve or a National Guard unit. And then I can go to school and I can do something. And at that point, there was a huge call for male nurses. It's like, if I go to school and I get my RN, I'll get a commission and then I can go back active and they were paying good premiums for that at that point. So it's like, let's do that. But I screwed that up in a daytime job when I got caught in a machine. And that was messy. It was a large set of rollers, and it caught my hand, and it pulled into the rollers. Unfortunately, it's soft things like skin, muscle, tendons, that kind of stuff were able to squeeze between the rollers. The bones wouldn't go, so it crushed them back. That was pretty messy, and I was fortunate in that I was able to reach the stop button because the guy I was working with took off. Mind you, my job for the cleaning company that I was working for at the time was I drove the step van. I was the delivery driver. But they're like, hey, we need you to help clean rugs. So we were cleaning rugs and putting them through this machine. And I got caught in there. That brought everything to a screeching halt. So, but, is bad. And it was bad. It was. I mean, it would lead to a series of 24 surgeries for reconstruction. And that was actually my choice because they gave me the option. They said, we can just take this off at the wrist and you'll get a hook and you'll read it, or we can try to save it and you'll have some feeling and some different use, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's like, okay, let's do this. And that was a lot of work. Unfortunately, there was also a bunch of infections, so it kept getting smaller and smaller. Great stories in the hospital. I was forever getting in trouble in the hospital because I would get bored. I would put a leash around my arm and take my stubby for a walk. Or I'd want to go visit other floors and they would get mad at me. You can't leave the floor. Or I would just start panic screaming because like I didn't know what else to do. And the nurses would come running in trying to figure out what's wrong. I was like, hi. I just hadn't seen anybody in a while. And they're like, we're going to kill you. You're just there all day, I think.
How long were you in the hospital for? Or was it intermittent stays periodically for each surgery?
Initially was 6 weeks. Then I was out for 5, and then in for 7, and then back in for a week, out for a few, in for a few more days. It would be in and out while they just did things. They did some more surgeries, and as the surgeries became less intense, my stays got shorter, at least for the first year. Then the second year, things were like running into difficulties. So they needed to do all of my grafts and stuff were shrinking, and the scars were shrinking. Life is just like life is life. You can't. The best things are real. But yeah, so
that obviously was a very traumatic experience. You can look back on it. Obviously, you have a sense of humor, and you can look back on it now with a bit of a smile. But I'm sure that was a pretty significant traumatic experience for both you and your young family. Or were you married at that point?
I wasn't.
So this
married.
was just
I was
you.
Single. I was 20 years old. I was 20 and on the move, and good heavens. Yeah, this brought everything to a screeching halt. It's like you now have to change your life.
I mean, you were disabled, essentially became a
Right.
person with a disability. People that have not seen your hand, you have, what, two digits? It's like a thumb.
I have my thumb. I mean, my pinky doesn't even make it to the joint.
Sure.
It's like I can't, I have a grandson who turns 3 tomorrow, and he calls it my zombie hand. And there are like countless stories of like things that went right, things that went wrong, bone fuses in my thumb, so I could get it to work and move, and things would just hurt, and you'd get through them.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our interview with Dan Frament. We're only halfway through our conversation with Dan, and part 2 premieres next week, where he recalls his initial plans to strike out solo with his first restaurant.
I had a restaurant plan for a place called That's a Wrap, and it was all like wraps instead of sandwiches. And I had built a menu and stuff. I was like, okay, I want to do this. This is going to be a goal. And then a place opened up in Saratoga called That's a Wrap. Well, that one's gone. Well, maybe we'll go coffee shop concept. I don't know. I wasn't sure.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on whatever streaming service you're using to make sure you get notified about upcoming chapters along with special bonus content. You can also visit TroyStoryPod.com to get signed up for email updates and check out previous episodes. Until next time, love yourself, love one another, and may Pod save Troy. Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City, is hosted, written, edited, and produced by me, John Salka. Our theme music is by Stephen J. Goldman at Four Legs Records. Like what you heard? Please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City. This is incredibly helpful for getting others to find our show. Want to know more? Visit TroyStoryPod.com to see upcoming episodes, guests, and bonus content. Thanks for listening. The views or opinions expressed by guests are their own and not of the host or Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City.
If there's a place with 10 great places,
There's the phone.
you got people coming to 10 great places, then, it's better than one.
Do you need to get it?
Huh?
Do you need to get it or not?
I have no idea. I mean, it's like, no. We'll see if there's. Amazing. We've been closed for 15 days.
And people are still calling.
And people are still calling. Okay, to be fair, most of them are trying to sell me Medicare Part C. And I keep telling them, I'm close, but I'm not there yet. It's like, almost, give a couple more years and I'm there. I'm 61, not 65. So, constant robocalls.